Welcome to the AgEmerge podcast, brought to you by Ag Solutions Network. Your farming challenges are unique, so your practices should be too. We're here to share emerging ideas, build connections, and provoke conversation.
Get ready to improve your soil, your crops, your livestock, and your family's livelihood. I'm your producer, Kim Chase.
And I'm your host, Monty Bottens. Thanks for joining us.
Welcome to another episode of the AgEmerge podcast. Today, joining us are two soil science powerhouses from Kansas State University, Dr. Ganga Hettiarachchi and Dr. Charles Rice. Our conversation explores a fundamental but often overlooked question: are all soil nutrients the same? And the answer? Well, it's more complex than you might think. We'll also talk about carbon, how it moves, how it's stored, and how it could be the key to building resilient soils that thrive for generations. This is an episode packed with some groundbreaking insights for scientists and farmers. So let's jump right in.
Well, welcome everyone to this episode of the AgEmerge podcast. Today I'm joined by two professors from Manhattan, and it's not the Big Apple. I've been told it's the Little Apple. We want to thank Ganga Hettiarachchi and also Charles Rice for being here. Welcome, both of you. Appreciate you taking the time to share your research. So I'd like to first off start with Ganga, if you would. Introduce yourself. And what brought you literally halfway around the world to where you are today at Kansas State University? And tell us your story and your background.
Yeah, thank you. And hello everyone. I was born and raised in Sri Lanka, and then I ended up choosing agriculture as my major when I was doing my undergraduate. And then while doing undergraduate studies for 4 years, I chose soil science as my specialty. So ended up doing research as an undergrad and ended up loving actually soil chemistry. So what drew me to soil chemistry? I love soils as a whole, although kind of driven into soil chemical processes and trying to understand. Whenever we see something, I would like to understand why. So why it is happening. I think that's what drew me to. And then I came to Kansas to do my master's on a scholarship, Fulbright scholarship, and then I ended up staying for my Ph.D. and then I did postdoctoral training at USCPA, as well as after that, I went back to Sri Lanka and worked as a senior lecturer for there for 2 years, and then took a research position over in Australia, South Australia in Adelaide. And then I love teaching and doing research. So that drew me back to Kansas and Kansas State University. Especially I knew Kansas State, and then I liked the environment in our department and conducive environment, good people to collaborate, like people like Chuck here. So that's what drew me back to Kansas.
Well, you never know where you're going to go, right? And sometimes you might think you have a certain direction you're heading, or a certain course of study, and then all of a sudden you discover something of interest, and it kind of takes you off into that tangent. Now, Chuck, I think you have a similar story in that regard. Sure, tell us about yourself and your background.
Yeah, so I'm Chuck Rice. I've been here at K-State since 1988, so I'm beginning of my 37th year at K-State. But I grew up outside of Chicago, a rural area, close enough to Chicago to visit, but we didn't have to stay and live there. But I didn't grow up on a farm, but was in a rural community, Yorkville, Illinois, and I was a first generation college student. My parents worked in factory and office jobs, but went to Northern Illinois University in geography. Like science, but I didn't like say associate with ag, although I had friends with that were agriculture. I baled hay, um, uh, collected chicken eggs, cut
That's why you
asparagus.
didn't like agriculture right there. You had to bale hay, and if
Yeah,
you know
yeah,
Illinois, the time that you bale hay it is guaranteed to be the hottest and the most humid day uh,
yeah,
of the month is when you're on the hay rack throwing.
yeah, yeah,
Anyway, go
yeah. And
ahead.
this was
Sorry,
the
John.
small bales that you had to throw up onto the hay rack. So, actually, the worst job is cutting asparagus at 6 in the morning. Uh,
It's hard on your back.
yeah, yeah. But then went to Northern Illinois University, majored in geography, which was physical geography, which is really soil and water science. Um, did an internship at Argonne National Lab on surface mine reclamation. And that's what really turned me on to research and science. And so I did a master's in reclamation at University of Kentucky, stayed there, did my Ph.D. in soil microbiology, mostly on nitrogen cycling in no-till systems. And then I had a great opportunity to do a postdoc at Michigan State University with Jim Teege, who's world-renowned microbiologist. Worked with him and then came to K-State. Um, been working um, on carbon nitrogen cycling in ag systems. A portion of my work is on grasslands. We have the Kanza Tallgrass Prairie Research Biological Station here, and that's really set my vision to try to understand the prairie and then develop ag systems to be more like the prairie. And we can talk a little bit about that. So that's kind of my background.
Well, interesting. And K-State brought the two of you together, and you were part of a really one of the things I enjoy to do, and I've shared this before on the podcast, but I enjoy reading research studies, and especially when it comes to things that contribute to our body of knowledge in regards to what I'll broadly call soil health or regenerative agriculture. And the study that you published here in June is pretty interesting to learn about. Not all nutrients are nutrients, right? The source of nutrient is pretty important,
Right.
and how that affects soil function at a as a broad term. But I don't want to steal all the thunder here, so I'll let you jump into a little bit of it. Well, first off, it's really hard to get long-term studies or areas and where we can derive data from long term because today's research is 3 years and out. So
Yeah.
that's one part of it. But um, well, Chuck, I'm going to start with you on this as far as kind of the site, the selection, and how it began, right? And then
Sure.
I think Ganga kind of follow up on, okay, then what have we been able to learn over this long period of time, and just the whole reason for this study and what you're trying to find.
Yeah. So when I arrived here at K-State, well, I did my PhD at, like I said, at Kentucky on nitrogen cycling, and they had one of the early no-till experiments. It started in '69. I was there
The home
in
of
the
no-till is Kentucky. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So, and then I was there in the '80s. So I had the fortunate experience of looking at long-term systems. So when came here to K-State, we started a study. It was a 3-year, supposed to be a 3-year grant to look at comparing no-till and tilled systems in nitrogen source. So we compared synthetic fertilizer, at that time ammonium nitrate, which doesn't exist now, and we switched to urea, and then we were looking at organic nitrogen source as the nitrogen for growing corn. It was supposed to be 3 years, and the goal was to look at leaching losses and nitrogen dynamics. Well, because of my background, I decided to keep the experiment going. The funding ended. I would, it actually is still going. So it's finished up its 34th year. And we'll start 35 here in a couple months. Um, but I foolishly kept it going. And in between grant years or funding cycles, I cobbled some funding together to keep it at least going. And it's now, the problem is I can't stop it because it's so valuable that we're seeing some very unique things, like you said earlier, that long-term funding, and particularly for soil health, it's really, really important to look at long-term changes and how that impacts the soil environment and production. So that's how it started. And so over the years, we've been obviously monitoring yields, but we've done nitrogen gas, nitrous oxide emissions, leaching. But then now we've looked at carbon storage, sequestration in these systems. And we're finding some very, very unique things out of that we wouldn't be expected. And some of that's still being published. We got a series of articles that we're writing up here this year. We kind of deconstructed, sampled the heck out of it and tried to measure everything we can. So,
Well, you won't hurt our feelings if you share things that you shouldn't. So
no, 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 no. Yeah,
go ahead and tell us everything. But,
yeah.
no,
Well,
that's a great, that's a
what will lead into what Ganga
right.
has done, but so what's happened is from the carbon standpoint and nitrogen, when we switch from fresh manure, cattle manure to composted organic food waste and manure. And so as a nitrogen source, we had to put on more material to get the equivalent amount of nitrogen from composting because it's more stabilized and less available. So what happened in the top 2 inches that with no-till, it increased, and then when we added more the compost, it increased a lot more faster. But then what happened in the top 2 inches, it stayed flat. It didn't increase after I'm trying to think 15 um, yeah 15 or 20 years. And conventional wisdom would say that soil is done storing carbon. It can't sequester anymore. But what happened was that when the top 2 inches leveled off, we started to see an increase in the 2 to 6 inch zone. And that's been going on for the last 15 years or so. And now in the last 5 years, it's getting to a high level, but now we're starting to see carbon translocating, moving down and storing into the um, 6 to 12 inch zone. And nobody's ever seen that before. Um, and it's because we're doing no-till and then really pushing the system and putting as much material, not excess, but material for nitrogen. But we're seeing that translocation. So the question is, how much carbon, how much nitrogen can this soil store? Because then if the 12-inch layer fills up, does it move down? I probably won't be around for another 34 years. At least probably not doing research that. So, but and I turn 70 next week, so that's why I'm using my baseline there. But it does, the question is how much can these soils hold? And not only are we storing carbon, but we're building nitrogen in these systems as well. So, and of course, some of that nitrogen will be recycled into corn crop. And so it's pretty exciting to see that we're building soil health and we're providing some sustainability resiliency in that production system.
So one thing that stands out to me there is you have to almost reach a um, critical mass in that top 0 to 2 horizon before you ever affect the 2 to 6, right?
Right.
You
Yeah.
reach that critical mass before it goes deeper.
Right.
And but it didn't require inverting or mixing
No.
that to happen. I think that's a key element in all this. So, all right, Ganga.
So, and can I make one
Yeah,
other
please
comment
do.
on that? Is of course, we have the tilled system, so we do mix it in the top 6 inches. But if we do a carbon balance, what we're seeing is that active tillage, I mean, it's not aggressive tillage, it's a chisel disc system, that 30% of the carbon that we've added to the soil is lost back to the atmosphere just by the active tillage. So no-till, not only we're sequestering, but we're retaining, we're not losing as much. We're conserving that carbon that we add.
So, uh-oh. That's another little inconvenient fact. All right. So dive into a little bit maybe on the or fill in some more of the blanks there where you come in, Ganga, on that and describe maybe some of the mechanisms that are driving this activity, this movement of carbon. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah, happy to do that. And just to put the that soil carbon differences, especially soil organic carbon level differences, we observed in that top the 2 inches. We had about, when we sampled in 2012. We had about this, especially those microaggregates we use for this study. We had about 6.5% soil organic carbon in the no-till manure compost system, compared to, again, no-till, the inorganic nitrogen added one or the urea added one, we had about 3%. And very close to the control, which was about 2.7%. So the aggregates, we actually look at carbon as well. Go ahead.
by the control, you mean where there was no additional nitrogen added to the system.
Added to the
Okay.
system, correct.
So we have a plot where we don't add any nitrogen for 34 years, which is really, really interesting.
It was
But
corn.
for corn, yeah, but we're still getting 40 bushel acre after 34 years of no nitrogen. There's a lot of recycling.
Yeah. All right,
Yeah.
continue.
Yeah. So so I was interested in what is happening, why we have more soil organic carbon in these aggregates. So so we know that theoretically, like we know there can be different mechanisms. Like one reason could be that we do have maybe more advanced type of or more complex type of soil organic carbon, so that they do not degrade that easily. Microbes cannot decompose those that easily. And then the other mechanism could be that with these kind of soil amendments, we have better aggregation, so that we have more physical protection. So soil carbon stored in aggregate longer. And then the other mechanism that we think happening, probably very important as well, that is these amendments are either changing or impacting soil mineralogy, like iron mineralogy, those minerals that capable of binding soil organic carbon. And that is why it is retained in these aggregates in higher quantities. So so I had a student so Pavitra, that was her PhD research. So she was keen on traveling to synchrotron facilities and learning this new technique, because it's not just data collection was complex, but analyzing was complex as well. And then looking at trying to see how carbon and other nitrogen, iron, aluminum, silicon, how they are distributed in these aggregates, and then what's the relationship and what's the form of that, to get some additional insights into mechanisms.
So I think, as farmers, we're used to, you know, we're buying nitrogen. It's one thing. It's very simple, and we think about maybe potassium and phosphorus, and we think about these elements as we're talking, and we're like, oh, carbon, yeah, that's carbon. Oh yeah, that's organic matter. We don't, Yeah, that's the black stuff. It's simple. Boom, done. No, no, it's not. Carbon is extraordinarily complex. It appears in multiple forms. And whether it's in a carbonate form with bound like a calcium carbonate or sodium bicarbonate, or there's all sorts of forms there, plus the organic structures, and um, I don't even know how many hundreds, if not thousands, of forms of carbon are within the soil, or even if we truly know. But you're looking at the carbon more from a structural uh, standpoint in there, and then because of that structural standpoint then drives the age or the long-term stability of that carbon staying in the soil. Is that a good way to say that for folks?
Yes, yes,
Eh,
that
eh,
is a very good way to put that. And then what we know now and what we have, not just our study but others as well, it's sometimes it doesn't matter whether that carbon is a complex form or simple form. If it is protected, uh, like physically or chemically, that could stay.
So that
So
that there is the headline, right? It's like we've all been kind of focusing on the carbon, like get as much as we can into the soil. And boy, the more complex it can be, the more, closer to humus it can be, the better, right? But wait, then all of a sudden it's like, wait a minute. It matters what it's bound with in the soil. That's what drives the long-term stability. And is this kind of what we're missing in this whole carbon sequestration measurement of, it's been hard to it's such a moving target to try to figure out what we're storing in the soil. Do you think that's what's driving this annoyingness, if you will, to actually get quantification of soil carbon storage?
Yeah,
The
I'll jump
structural
in here.
issue,
So,
maybe more so than a quantity issue.
right. Well, yeah, you're right. So we can put carbon in the soil, but then the
Keep it.
longevity of it and stability of that is depending upon the chemistry, the physics, and the microbiology. What we were talking about earlier that we saw the 0 to 2 inch accumulate carbon, then that quit store, it became was at an equilibrium, but then it moved down. So, conventional wisdom would say it should be moving down every year, but there was a capacity of that soil to stabilize that, what Ganga showed in protecting that both physically and chemically. And then what we've seen since then, we've done some microbial analysis, is that the microbes um, uh, can't get access to that carbon as well, so they don't process it, and that keeps its stability. And then eventually, again, after 30 years, we're seeing it move down into sublayers. So it's protected by the mechanisms that Ganga's looked at, and then the microbes don't have as readily access to it that would then use it for their food source, and some of that would go to the atmosphere.
We're taking a short break to share that the AgEmerge podcast is brought to you by the team at Ag Solutions Network. Rooted in innovation, ASN is committed to leaving the land better than we found it, not simply maintaining it. We're here to help you navigate the balancing act of productivity and building a legacy. From practices to products, ASN is more than a new jug. It's a new way of thinking. So don't be afraid to be different. Be afraid to be the same. Contact Ag Solutions Network today at asn.farm. And now, back to our show.
Let's talk about some of those mechanisms that farmers are doing that could drive, and I think this is going to come into one of the treatments you got, that could drive microbes then using that carbon that is in the soil and structurally stable, that could cause the microbiological community to use that as a food source. We know tillage, oxygenation, and physically breaking of aggregates is one, but there's something else that farmers are doing that I think is kind of can be um, inferred from your research, or maybe that was part of it, as far as the application of the urea, the nitrogen, what that's doing to the aggregation of our soils. Is that a fair way to say that?
Well, I mean, it really comes down to how much plant material and compost is processed plant material essentially. Um, about how much plant material you get into the system. And so even with your fertilizer, urea, you're growing crops, right? And then you have the corn stalks and leaves that get returned back to the soil. The more you can put back into that system, the more potential there is to build aggregates and protect it, like what Ganga was talking about. So, um, you need to have material going into the system, organic material, whether it's plant matter, corn stalks, wheat straw, or compost.
What I was getting at is the biomass you have going into the system from the crop itself is
Right,
significantly higher on the urea treatment versus the no treatment.
right,
However, the soil aggregation, soil organic carbon seems to be minimally different. I mean, not 5x difference, like
right,
subsequent yields would be on the top. So what I was getting at is our fertilization. We probably have the plant material to create the uh,
the,
aggregates, but
right,
our use of the fertilization then is causing them to be degraded by the soil microbial community to release back to feed that crop, keep that in balance. So what I'm getting at is as we use higher rates or all at once fertilization. So I'm trying to think how do we apply this to millions of corn acres? As
right.
we use high synthetic nitrogen rates with no plant material associated with them, and we use it all at once and ahead of when the plants need it, we risk reducing our ability to accumulate soil carbon. Is that a fair way to say that?
Not exactly. Uh, we do that high application of nitrogen fertilizer all at once or pre-plant. What it does is a lot of it is lost because you don't have the plant there taking up that nitrogen fertilizer. So we waste a lot of nitrogen. We got as a nitrous oxide emissions or leaching, right?
Teaching, yeah.
And you think about the weather when you put your nitrogen on in April, but the plant really doesn't need it till what's called V6. So that's generally in our region mid-June, right? So you got 6 weeks in the Midwest that the plant isn't really needing a lot of nitrogen, but you put it on pre-plant and that's also when we have a lot of rainfall.
Mhm.
So then we have a lot of loss to the environment, but it's a loss of profitability expense to the farmer as well. We do build up aggregates, but not as much because you need as that plant material to supply the carbon for the microbes to build those aggregates. But adding organic source as your nitrogen or a combination of synthetic and organic, you're going to build up things faster and enhance those protection mechanisms that Ganga talked about.
Yeah.
How do we get more, Ganga? How do we get more of that on the land? As far as do we run into a balance issue as far as is the application rates that you're using of compost uh, is that feasible
Yeah.
to do that on a large acreage, or do we run out of a balance because of our current? Could we replicate this on all the corn acres, or is how do we tackle that?
Yeah, I think, yeah. So if we look at it, whether we can do it, most of the answer would be that no, we don't have enough. So I do think that, like Chuck kind of indicated, the scenario could be that you actually maybe use it some years, or use it like a mixed sources, mixing inorganic and organic. So depending on how much the organic nitrogen sources you have. And then I do think that rather than thinking that it need to be 100% nitrogen supply through these type of materials, like mixing could have a benefit. So because when plant needs it, if it is right away, so that is addressed by that inorganic nitrogen, and then these organic sources will keep on slowly releasing it. So I think the right mixture can work uh, the same way, in my view, like providing meeting plant need, as well as feeding soil, or like protecting soil health that way. So,
And going from, I know one comment, two things I'd like to ask, and you can pick and choose which one first. But there was a step change essentially from fresh manure to compost in the past, and you mentioned that more total tons went out because essentially I believe the compost had less nitrogen content to it.
Less available nitrogen.
Yes,
yeah.
yes. Okay, so it was more organic nitrogen in there, but less plant available nitrogen. So, is the compost a key component to this versus fresh manure? Would be one thing, and then the other thing is there certain soil amendments, mineral amendments, such as calcium, that can be applied that would encourage more formation of these stable aggregates within the soil, and based on what you've come across here.
Mhm.
I'll tackle the compost
Okay.
and then let Ganga talk about the calcium and
Oh, you're going to
iron and
take the
other
easy
things.
one. I see how you are.
Well,
Pulling pulling seniority here.
she's the soil chemist, right?
Oh, okay.
So I think what Ganga was saying is, well, what Ganga is saying is right. It's um, in mixing sources, the availability of manure, compost is not going to be, it's not going to be uniform, right? We're actually now composting food waste from the dorms as our organic source on this experiment. We have a soil health network across the state of Kansas, 6 different farms, and one farm near Kansas City. He's got a corn soybean rotation, and he's adding synthetic fertilizer, but then depends on the availability. Every other year or so, he adds a composted poultry litter. He trucks it in and applies that to his no-till systems. And actually, over 7 years, we've seen the same thing that we're seeing here on our research study farm, is that he's building aggregates, he's building carbon, he's building microbial biomass over that a period of time. And he's also seeing that dark organic matter. He puts a shovel in the ground, and you can see that he's building that A horizon, and the organic horizon is moving down, and now it's down to 6 to 12 inches, and visually he can see it. So he feels good that he can see visually that he's building his organic matter and building soil health in that case. So yeah, we're not gonna, if you have access to organic amendments, use it. And it's not just applying nitrogen, it's applying other nutrients, and it's making your soil healthier and building resiliency. Now I'll let Ganga talk the soil chemistry question.
Yes. Yes. Thanks. I agree with what Chuck said. And then to add on to your question about how about adding other soil amendments like lime, or calcium carbonate to enhance this or help with soil aggregation. Yes, so if we think about it, too much of anything could be detrimental. So we know that if we do add excessive, that could impact pH, and then there can be consequences related to that, like low micronutrient availability and all those things that you could expect, and even impacting phosphorus availability and other nutrient availabilities. But to answer your question, yes, so the calcium and like the calcium carbonate as calcium carbonate, as well as after dissolution and giving calcium to solution, that calcium too, that can act like a great bridging between like the like minerals and organic carbon. So in increasing calcium levels going to be helpful for soil aggregation. To answer your question, again, like I said, we do need to manage soil so that not go into extremes, so that it starts showing negative impact.
Right. And it, nutrient lime has more of a role than just nutrient availability.
Yes.
I think something that farmers need to know. It's not you're not just liming to make your P and K more available. You're doing it that also helps with soil aggregation formation, especially when available calcium is there for that to happen. I What about okay, so cover crops, another
Yeah.
source of where we can grow plant in place versus haul in dead plants. Um, Thoughts on how that can add or be a part of the system from the um, we know we observe more aggregates now. The stability of those aggregates we can't track, right? We're
Yeah.
out there at the shovel today, don't know how long they last. There's different lengths of all of them, but based on the organic glues. But maybe what's your thoughts on that, Ganga, on how we can improve aggregation through additional farming practices such as cover crops or crop rotation, and how that fits into this aggregation puzzle?
Yeah, I think cover crop can have a lot of beneficial effect. Okay, so starting with having that soil cover, so protecting soil from disturbances when we don't have like like that. So keeping soil in place. So that could be one thing that it does. And then if you're thinking about the cover crop root exudates, and then these root exudates can also actually impact, like I was talking about manure, impacting soil minerals and making them more reactive. So that can happen with root exudates. And then also root exudate itself can help for soil aggregation to like enhance soil aggregation. So I do think that it can work in multiple ways. And then at the same time, like I said, there could be some negative consequences, unintended negative consequences as well. So we have to kind of watch to see what is it doing in that system, and when we can use cover crop, and what type of cover crop we should be using, because not all cover crop do the same thing. So
That's very true. I mean, summer cover crops are actually anti-aggregation, but I think sometimes cover crops get a little bit oversimplified to the farm applications. Like, oh, well, it's going to take photosynthate and exude all these sugars out of their roots to feed the microbes. Okay, that there's far more than that, and you hinted on it there a little bit. Organic acids and what those are about. So that process they can create various organic acids such as
yeah,
oxalic acid, and it's a very powerful agent then that makes these cations available to create these aggregate structures. Is that a that can lead to the aggregate structures?
yeah. So I said like that could impact soil minerals. So yes, so the when you have organic acids can help soil minerals to kind of dissolve and release these nutrients to solution, and then making it available that way. So it could go either way. So the reason I said that it sometimes could be negative, because we have seen like total dissolved phosphorus in increase in one of our the Kansas agricultural watershed experiments. That is also now like we are in the second 5 year. And so another faculty member is leading, and there's multi group working in there. And then we started seeing that increase in dissolved reactive P, agronomic sense could be good. But if we get a rain, and then if this end up in moving away from the site, then that could be not good for farmer or would not good for water resources.
So
So
yeah, not all phosphorus is phosphorus, just the same.
yeah,
So soluble reactive phosphorus is very mobile in our streams and watersheds. And I know up in north, in our good friends in Canada, they run into this at cover crops in Red River Valley. Cover crops get a frost, and all of the green plant material is loaded with soluble reactive phosphorus. A rain event or a snow melt event sends it all into Hudson Bay and causes blooms and poor water quality. So, but on the other hand, there's typically a preponderance of good to bad. Um, I'll take green over brown. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
yes,
and I think
Well,
that goes
yes,
back to
yes.
the prairie system that you originally mentioned. Some of the things about the prairie system is typically anytime something can be growing in a prairie system, there is a species or 12 or 20 or 200 growing at any one time within that prairie system. And is that secret to locking up, not creating a leaky system? In other words, not letting nitrogen or phosphorus leave that environment, because when the prairie system was here prior to us, there wasn't a fertilizer dealer to put stuff back, right?
right. So, so yeah, so the tallgrass prairie kind of has been my modeled system to understand and how we can make ag systems to be more.
Oh, why? Why? Who cares? It's a tall grass prairie. It should way. You can't harvest anything off. You can't. Why do you want to model that?
Well,
I
yeah.
think so. I'm being facetious.
No, I know you
I
are.
know
Yeah,
why, but explain to people, why is it important to model that? Because it just
yeah,
boils down to, it is like the most photosynthetic productive system on the planet.
right.
Is that a good way to say that?
Yeah, so if you look at the tallgrass prairie, far as just say a carbon storage, people don't, they only got their heads above ground. And if you look at total carbon storage in the system, there's as much carbon or more carbon stored in the prairie, tallgrass prairie, as there is in temperate forest or in
Get out the
and
chainsaws and start planting grass seed.
right, yeah. Um, and a lot of that carbon is going to be stable that, Ganga talked about. When a forest fire goes, what happens in the forest or the carbon, right? Goes back to the atmosphere.
That
When
is
we have prairie fires, it's 80% of that carbon is below ground and is protected. Okay, so from a carbon standpoint, that's a model system, but your point here, it's very nitrogen efficient. We don't fertilize it, but yeah, it's productive and we graze it. We have cattle grazing it to produce our beef and that. But it's also because of those living roots year round, we're putting carbon down, but it's very um, water efficient and it's climate resilient. When it's dry here, occasionally in Kansas, a lot in Kansas,
especially
right?
Western Kansas. Yes.
Yeah, especially Western. But those grasses are still being productive. So it's climate resilient, it's water efficient, it's high carbon storage and nutrient efficient, and it's biodiverse, as you mentioned. So my goal, and if you look at the regenerative ag principles, you want minimal disturbance, which is the prairie. No, it's strictly
Not doing
no-till, right?
anything to it. Yes.
Yeah. It's uh,
Covered, well
it's
armored,
living roots. It's
root,
continuously covered.
verse.
You have crop diversity, plant diversity in there.
You got those four legs.
Um, and so um, that's why I use the prairie. Now, obviously, in cropping systems, we're harvesting the the crop for grain for the most part. The prairie puts most of its carbon below ground, not doesn't produce much grain. But can we use the principles of the prairie and apply them to ag systems? And that's what my goal is. So again, we want to do no-till, We want crop rotations. Cover crops can add diversity. We got living roots. And and keep the soil covered, covered. So we can do those things, and that's what we're doing here in Kansas. We got a regenerative ag initiative, and we're going to look at adding complexity to the system, cover crops, grazing those cover crops, no-till. And Ganga's actually helped me, but we've got some studies in Brazil, and they're 90% no-till, and they're continuously covered, and they have a very complex rotation. And so, can we take those principles from the prairie or Brazil and apply them to Midwestern agriculture?
So you guys teased a little bit there early on about some future articles going to be published. What are other findings you've had from this long-term study that we can look forward to?
Yeah, so one is we've torn apart, the microbial community composition. So as you might expect, that the microbial community, the biomass is much higher with the organic amendments. We got more carbon, more food for the microbes. But interesting, we also see changes in the composition. So we see more fungi, and fungi are absolutely, and what we're seeing is that it's absolutely critical because that fungal hyphae proliferate in the soil and they help build those aggregates, kind of like roots do, right? So they help bind chemically and physically those aggregates that help build those protection mechanisms. So we're seeing more fungi, and then of course with depth, we're seeing as that carbon translocates, we're building up that composition in biomass and fungal activity. We've looked at aggregation over time, and of course, aggregation is improving water stable aggregates. And then we're also a lot of people look at what's called particulate organic matter, POM, and MAOM, mineral associated, and Ganga is looking at the mineral associated carbon, organic matter, but we're also seeing the particulate because of the aggregation. It's available to the microbes, but yet it's still within those aggregates. So if the aggregates break open, like with tillage, then it's accessible. But as long as those aggregates are held together by the chemistry and the fungal hyphae, then even that microbially available carbon is protected. And so again, there's dual mechanisms there. So we're not only increasing mineral associated organic matter, but we're building up this available organic matter, but it's held in
Physically
those
protected.
aggregates.
Yeah. And that's extraordinarily important, right, Ganga, for keeping the long-term stability or the carbon storage, if you will, because if they're not accessible to the microbes, then they can stay in place. It's a love-hate relationship with these microbes, right? Why do people study these things? Chemistry is so much easier, isn't it, Ganga?
Oh,
I mean, chemistry, there's not all the personality involved. It just is what it is. And then you got these microbiologists that are they're a little out,
it,
aren't they?
it adds complexity. I love complexity.
I tell you,
Yeah,
it's amazing you
yeah.
two get along so well.
And then chemical processes, it's actually, if you look into, there's some could be abiotic and some biotic. So yeah,
Fair enough.
so
Fair
yeah,
enough.
combined with
What are some other interesting takeaways that you think would be good for farmers to know in the work that you're doing and really everybody in the regenerative space to know on some of the discoveries that you've come across? Well, first off, you've had the time, right? You've got the long term.
Yeah.
That's a real key. Question: is there a way to get a register of historical places for some of these long term trials? Because we all know about the Morrow plots, we know about the plots at Columbia. We know about the plots in Germany, and they've got the notoriety. Hopefully, University of Illinois doesn't build a building or a sports complex on top of the Marl plots. I think they're not going
They actually built a library underneath them.
well, yeah, yeah. So okay, but how do we protect these things? To be able to have this data, and then secondly, you're able to do DNA typing on microbes that you weren't able to do 35 years ago when this started. You're able
Right.
to do all this complex physical chemistry, scanning and things that you couldn't do when this started. Just imagine in 35 years when Chuck's 105 and he's still asking questions of these things because he still hasn't retired. Um, but imagine in 70 years with
Right.
technology that we don't know we'll have, what we can learn because we've saved these things.
Right.
How do
So,
we make that happen? How do we help people understand how
well,
important?
yeah, you asked the million-dollar question, right? Um, we actually had a National Academy workshop on soil information, and these long-term studies plots are a valuable resource, and we need a catalog. But then, I was able to cobble together funding and had the wherewithal to keep this thing going for 35 years. But it a lot of our funding is very mentally, short term, 3 years, 5 years, 5 years is considered long term. Um, so we need to have um, a program or understanding that these are valuable and, farming, particularly soil processes, it doesn't happen on a 3-year cycle. It happens on decadal or century scales. So we do need a registry. We need to have some, I guess, support or understanding that these are valuable uh, for for agriculture, the community, and understanding basic soil processes. Yeah, we got in. We have to get the mindset to retain some of these for long term. And one other point, uh, you mentioned long-term studies, and the oldest is the study at Rothamsted, right? And so I've been there a couple times, and so what we've also done is when we take soil samples, we have a room archived with soil samples over that 30, not every year, but every 3 or 5 years, we had a set of samples over that time period. And the administrators don't understand. They think that, well, that's just dirt, using
In
up
a cup, yeah.
space. Uh,
Yeah,
and
we need
but
some fill
now
dirt for this new dorm. So let's
yeah,
pour
right,
it on
right.
there to, build a
Yeah.
pad, right?
And we can go back. You're right. We've gone back and taken some of those samples and reanalyzed them for microbial enzyme activity, things like that. And so you're right. You're exactly right, is that we need to have some protocols and funding to store these samples so that we can reanalyze 30 years from now some new technology.
Yeah, see, you can't retire.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts on the work that you're doing, Ganga, and impact and what you're looking forward to in the future?
Yeah. I, I think the understanding is pretty important, although sometimes getting funding is difficult to do that sort of research. Like it's considered as like within agriculture, like a basic, more towards basic. But at the same time, I think it's I will continue to really try to understand why. So as much as I can, and then I agree with Chuck said and you said about the long-term experiments. I think we should have maybe a research program that's supporting these kind of long-term experiments. And then Chuck mentioned about Rothamsted, and then not only related to this knowledge about nutrient dynamics, but at the same time, the Rothamsted studies have shown that how these contaminants can actually sequester in soil and not really harming plants or not harming microorganisms, because naturally there are natural processes that they do attenuate in soil over time. And then it's very different from someone trying to study in a pot experiment by just adding a copper salt or salt of something and then looking at the toxicity.
Should have asked this earlier. Is this system under conventional weed control or herbicide weed control, or is it organic production?
No, yeah, we use glyphosate or, well, a mixture of herbicides
It'd be
to control the weeds.
to see
That's
aggregation accumulation in an organic system, because one of the things I go back and forth, and because I'm exploring organic on my own farm, but I have HEL ground. Okay, so I know what organic systems of the past did to HEL ground. It took the soil from the hillsides and put it in the bottoms. And I don't really want to repeat that experiment, but I think there's better informed decisions we can make. And I think, some tillage may work for the weed control if we can do the organic, and my organic friends say, hey, my soil is performing better now than when I was under no-till. So is that because they're adding compost in and they're building soil aggregates that if they would have added the compost on their no-till system, they would have been an even higher plateau of awesomeness versus, they're better than what they were under a no-till system, but under a no-till system, they never had the compost component.
right. Yeah,
I
and
make
that's
sense in all that one blathering there.
yeah, no, and that's some of the criticism on the studies is that you're comparing organic, so you're adding compost with tillage, and then they're looking at no-till with conventional fertilizer. And
If we did,
you're comparing apples and oranges.
right.
And there's been some studies actually, at least in our work, that maybe occasional tillage is okay, not aggressive. But if you till every year, the organic system, they're not having stable aggregates because they're mixing that all the time. And there's actually studies at Michigan State that shown if you look at the carbon balance, the no-till is better than the organic, because organic you're using fuel use to do a lot of tillage, where no-till you're not. So they've looked at greenhouse gas balance, and the no-till system still wins out with that. Now, there's great opportunities in organic because you're adding compost and that, but what fits the farmer's strategy and opportunities, right?
Very interesting. Any other closing thoughts while we're together here today?
No, this is great.
Yeah.
You just summarized 35 years of research, and I doubt it into, but
I could talk a whole day on it, but yeah.
I could too. And I love it. Basically taking a different look at a long-term study is what helped you lead to what is this mechanism that's storing carbon. And aggregates can be stable in the right conditions much longer than maybe the standard 30, 45 days.
Right.
And I think as farmers, and it is also good to know that in a no-till system, we can build aggregation at depth, but maybe we're just missing, we're missing biomass. And maybe there's a way that biomass can be either grown on the field or composted, brought to a field, but the system gets better, doesn't it? We can either have a degraded system or we can have an improving system. There's kind of no in between, and it's just amazing to see how that works. The prairie system's a beautiful example of that. It's a constantly improving system. So thank you both for all the work that you're doing to try to quantify and try to understand what is driving these mechanisms, chemically and biologically. And when we know that, then we can build the farming practices to try to most closely align to what is best for that soil inherently. Um, those are the kind of things that make me excited.
Well, good. Thank you.
But
Thank you.
thank you both for your work, and keep it up. We expect another 35 years. You'll report back. They won't even have podcasts in 35 years.
They'll replace it with something else.
Yeah, we'll be replaced by computers. But anyway, thank you so much, and I appreciate your time, and keep up the great work.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. Thanks a lot.
What a great conversation. We give a huge thanks to Ganga and Chuck for joining us today and sharing their passion and decades of research. If there's one thing to take away from today's episode, it's this: not all nutrients are created equal. The source matters, the form matters, and the way nutrients interact with soil minerals, microbes, and organic matter, it's a whole other level of complexity. And when it comes to carbon, it's not just about how much you get into the soil. It's about how stable it is and how long it stays there. The way carbon moves and binds within the soil can make all the difference between short-term gain and long-lasting soil health. This type of research is what helps guide our system's approach to soil health. So if you'd like to keep up to date on these topics, be sure to subscribe to the AgEmerge podcast. And if you'd like to learn more about what we're doing, you can visit our website at asn.farm, and there you can click on links to follow us on Facebook, X, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube. There is a lot of great things happening and always something to learn. Thanks for listening.